The home of drummer-composer Billy Drummond is one part drummer museum, one part hi-fi salon, and one part guided tour through Drummond's long and fruitful career. Drummond has worked with a who's who of jazz royalty for 30 years. His employers have included Sonny Rollins, Charles Tolliver, Eddie Henderson, Carla Bley, Steve Kuhn, and his own bands, as well as worked with Joe Lovano, Archie Shepp, Lee Konitz, J.J. Johnson, Nat Adderley, Horace Silver, Andrew Hill, and Freddie Hubbard. Billy's comfortable New Jersey home contains drums of all shapes and sizes, and similarly, high-fidelity components that filled more rooms than I can count. And everywhere you look, photos of drumming heroes past and present. When I asked Billy to reveal his favorite jazz drumming records, he went to work and completed the task, and then some. So Billy, I've known you since around 1990. You've been in New York since around 1990.
I've been in New York 2 or 3 years by that time. And
right.
So I was definitely the new guy, and I probably shouldn't even have been.
No, you definitely should have been, because you made records like Dubai and a few of your other solo records.
I hadn't done, by that time I had maybe done my first one as a leader.
Yeah, and that was really strong. You have a really strong conception as a drummer in general. You have a very unique approach and sound. So you've played with all the heavyweights in the world of jazz. What do you think has been key to your working with all these legends?
Well, at that time, the main thing was that they were alive and operating, and they were not opposed to hiring younger musicians that they felt like they could, the younger musicians could play their music, and that kind of apprenticeship had been the norm for the whole history of jazz. I mean, a younger person that maybe had a little talent could learn and apprentice with a person that was way better than them, that knew how to play, and that, and so you learn from playing with those kinds of people. And so the fact that those kinds of people were alive and walking the earth and hiring people like myself was just a blessing, and I'm glad I came along at the time that I did, because now I don't think it happens as frequently because those people aren't around. I'm talking about people that, when we talk about Sonny Rollins or J.J. Johnson or Horace Silver or Bobby Hutcherson or Joe Henderson, we're talking about people that are very, 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 very important in the development of the music, and will always be high marks, high examples of what this music is all about and how it's developed and over the years. So there will always be in the history books. All the drummers, Max, Elvin, Arthur Taylor, Connie Kay, Vernell Fournier, not to mention Tony Williams, Philly Joe Jones, Art Blakey, Billy Higgins, Ben Riley. All these people were Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson. I mean, these people were still around. This is called The Best of Buddy Rich. I think it's on a label called World Pacific Jazz. And at that time, that was my favorite drummer, Buddy Rich, because he was on TV, and I would get permission to stay up late at night to watch Johnny Carson or Hollywood Palace or these kind of variety shows that would come on television at the time. And you could look in the TV guide and see who was going to be on that week, and I would look in the TV guide and see if he was going to be on Johnny Carson. And he was on there quite a bit, because he's, he was a celebrity, he was a star, but he was also an incredibly great drummer.
What do you love about Buddy Rich?
He can just play the drums incredibly well. I mean, I saw him play twice. I saw him play when I was about 11 or 12, and then I saw him play when I was about 16, because he came to my high school. His ability to play the drums was just, I don't know. I mean, the style of music that he played, I didn't gravitate towards, but I still can binge watch him on YouTube, just marveling at the command that he had on the instrument. It's just kind of it's at another zone. I mean, even now, to me, his command of the drums. Yes, I mean his command of the drums. I don't think that there's anybody that could. Well, if you had to go on stage, opening for or coming on after him, it would be hard for anybody to really, because I mean he could just go to another level on the drums because of his unbelievable ability to play the drums. Everybody talks about Kind of Blue, but my favorite of that period was this record, and this has, of course, Philly Joe Jones on drums, and this I've heard this record my whole life because it probably came out around the same time as I was born. It was recorded in 1958, and I know every song on here, and I know every solo, and it's like it's embedded in my brain, and still I can put this on right now, and I'm still wowed by it, just like I was my whole life, and I've been listening to it for 65 years.
What's Philly Joe's special contribution?
Wow. Well, his audacious imagination fueled by his incredible command of being able to play the instrument, his swing, the way he incorporates the rudimental technique and applying it to this genre is so exciting and so beautiful. His sound, his touch, everything about him. Everything swings, everything sounds great, everything is creative, everything is there. For this kind of music, for the swinging jazz music, it's hard to beat Philly Joe Jones. This is a record called Krupa and Rich. And like what I was saying about the audio quality, this is also my father's. The audio quality of this is really good. And so you can hear, when you hear it, especially like when you hear Gene play, you can kind of hear like, now what would have been wonderful is to have heard Chick play with this kind of fidelity. And there's a certain kind of dance rhythms that Gene plays with. Now Buddy plays definitely more volatile and more technique and volcanic and just impeccable. But Gene has a certain kind of dance quality, a swing quality, because he grew up, in Chicago, where Louis Armstrong was playing with King Oliver, so he was watching Baby Dodds and all that stuff. So, and then he was also a contemporary of Chick Webb, the famous battle at the Savoy between Benny Goodman and Chick Webb's band, and it's reported that Gene just basically just laid down and said, "Chick, just wipe me out," and so when I listen to this, I always think, man, I just wish we could have heard Chick Webb in this context at this particular time. I'm a huge Jackie McLean fan, and so I have, probably his whole recorded output. But and then the way Arthur Taylor's the drummer on here with Paul Chambers and Blue Mitchell and Walter Bishop Jr. And this is like what you said. This is an original pressing, and so I just love this record. I love the way A.T.'s sound is. I love his cymbal sound. I love the sound of his drums, Gretsch drums.
What set him apart from other drummers of that period?
Well, he was kind of in the same era as Philly Joe and Art Blakey and Kluk and Max, but he was a little not as well, those guys were leaders, you know, also, and they really kind of had styles that were just concrete. I mean, he was kind of an amalgamation of all of them, but a really great amalgamation of them. And I love his sound and the way he's comping on all those Blue Note records and Riversides and Prestige. Just the way his comping is so hip. It's just so New York hip. And he's from Sugar Hill, the same neighborhood as Sonny Rollins and Bud Powell lived up there. And
is that Manhattan?
Yeah, Sugar Hill in Harlem. Oh. And Jackie McLean and Kenny Drew. All those guys were teenagers growing up and learning how to play because their neighbors were Coleman Hawkins and people like that. So they were young, and Bird was the biggest thing in their lives at the time and all that kind of stuff. So he's part of that whole group of people that came up, you know, that were born in the 20s and came up in the 30s and saw bebop emerge and kind of like, uh-oh, this new guy, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, they're doing something different than the swing guys were doing. So these are the direct results of, to me, the bebop guys. So this record is fantastic. I mean, and it's another one. All these records that I grew up listening to, I still listen to. They don't. It's not like, oh, I used to listen to that now it sounds dated or what. Not hardly. Horace-Scope, and I used to play with Horace. So this record has Roy Brooks. This is Horace-Scope by the Horace Silver Quintet. And the tunes, again, the songs on here, they're so memorable. They're so hummable. The melodic content is just as important as the blowing on the changes. I mean, Blue Mitchell and Junior Cook, and Roy Brooks is the drummer on here. Gene Taylor is the bass player. This is a record that my dad used to play. My dad loved organ groups, so he had a lot of Jimmy Smith records and Jack McDuff records and stuff like that. And so this record was a real big influence on me, even though I don't really play like that or anything like that. But I love this record. And this guy's name is Joe Dukes. And this record is called The Soulful Drums of Joe Dukes with the Brother Jack McDuff Quartet. And this is an early recording featuring George Benson, the guitar player, and Red Holloway, and Jack, and Joe. And he's just a super powerful, showy kind of drummer, but all these tunes feature him. They're showcases for him. And he's really rocking and rolling on here. And so this was a big record for me. Concerto for Drums by Louis Bellson was another that my dad had that I love this record. And on this record is George Duvivier and Don Abney on piano. I think is Zoot Sims and Charlie Shavers is playing trumpet. And on this record, he takes a drum solo and he uses this invention of his called jingle sticks, which are drumsticks that had little tambourines, like little finger cymbals attached to them. And one of my first trips to Europe, he was at the same festival. He and Pearl Bailey, who was his wife. And when we landed at the airport in I don't know if it was Geneva or Zurich or wherever we were getting our bags, and this was also early on in my career, and so of course I was so excited to meet him, and I told him about this record and how I loved this record and how he used the jingle sticks on it, and sure enough he reached in his bag, pulled out a pair and said, "Here, take these." I still have them. They're sitting up there They're up there on top of my snare drum up there. And I have them in the wrapper. I never used them. I messed around with them a little bit, but I just want to keep them pristine because they were given to me from him. And he was the sweetest guy in the world. And it was so funny because his wife, Pearl Bailey, I don't know how long they were going to be there, but she must have had 15 suitcases. And when we were talking, she said, "Lou," she called him Lou. "Lou, my feet are hurting. Could you find my bedroom slippers?" And he was like on his hands and knees going through each He's going through each suitcase, just like, like a regular guy with his wife, finding her slippers. It was so sweet. He was a sweet guy.
And she was a real star back then.
She was a star, yeah. She was an actress and vocalist, yeah, everything. Yeah, she was like big time. And they were like, they were one of the first public interracial couples because they were both known. He was a well-known musician, one of the greatest drummers, and she was, like we were saying, a big star. So they, they paved the way for change just in society in general. One of the records that my mom would always request my dad to play was this record. And at that time, it seemed like a lot of African American people that I knew through my parents and stuff, my friends' parents and stuff, it seemed like everybody had this record. And this, of course, is Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley, and with Cannonball's band, with his brother Nat, Joe Zawinul, Sam Jones, I think is Sam Jones on here, and Louis Hayes on drums, who's just incredible. And so the music is great, the singing is great, the accompaniment to the singing and the soloist is great. Louis Hayes is just, as always, there's nothing that he's on that's just not. He's another one that's out of that same group of people that is the direct descendant of Max and Philly Joe and Art Blakey and Kenny Clark. So along with A.T., he's a little younger because Lou came to New York when he was, I don't know, 17, 18 years old with Horace Silver, direct from Detroit, already playing great. So he'd been in New York since 1956, and thank God we still have him, and he's still playing great. And he's a great guy, and he's a window to the past, man, because you can talk to him. I've talked to him a bunch of times just about where he would see, he said, I saw Buddy Rich and Art Blakey at Birdland. And I was like, wow, well, who came out on top or whatever? He said it was a draw because Buddy, with his technique, was pretty much unsurpassed, but Art Blakey was like a freight train, and he a dynamo, and so it's like you couldn't pick because they both brought so much to the table in their individual way. And this artist was kind of beyond category, Roberta Flack, and this is her second record called Chapter 2, and the music on here is just timeless. I don't know if you know this record. And the drummers on here are, I think it's Ray Lucas, he was like I think he played with King Curtis and Hank Crawford and stuff, but he's on a lot of great jazz records too, one being Stanley Turntine's New Time Shuffle, where he's just ridiculous. He played with Ray Charles. He was one of those drummers that wasn't a superstar, but was working probably every night and every day. This is a record that was originally called something about the Turkish baths.
A Turkish woman at the bath.
Yeah, Turkish women at the bath.
What's the name of this record?
This is called Bliss, but they retitled it and put it out under Chick's name. But it's Pete LaRocca is the drummer, and this is Pete LaRocca is one of my favorite drummers, and he's kind of a drummer that's he's got his own style. He has his own way of playing, and it's loose and tight at the same time. He's kind of accredited for taking one of the first kind of free jazz drum solos on a Jackie McLean record called New Soil, where he plays this song called Minor Apprehension, where he takes a drum solo completely free. It's not based on the form. It's not based on any tempo. It's just, and he was, he's got, Joe Chambers says he's the missing link between the generation of Max and Philly and Art Blakey and Roy Haynes, and then the next generation with Joe Chambers and Tony Williams and Jack DeJohnette and those people. And I can see when he says that, when he told me that, I looked at it and I was like, I think he's right, because he's right in between and he's right on the cusp of what was getting ready to happen. And he was one of those people that it was happening with Paul Bley, Footloose. But this record is great, and then of course his solo record on Blue Note called Basra. And this has Joe Henderson, Steve Kuhn, and Steve Swallow. And the funny thing about this record, I didn't know about this record. I was in Tower Records years ago when it was down on, where was that, West 4th? No.
West 3rd.
Well, yeah, on Broadway
West
and West,
4th.
yeah.
West 4th.
And I was in there, and I was, at the time, I wasn't living in New York at the time. I was up visiting because I would come up here a lot to just hang out prior to my moving up here. And I was in the record store, and Chick Corea was shopping. And I went up to him, of course, and he said, "What do you got?" And I was like, "Well, I'm really into Steve Kuhn." And I had a couple of Steve Kuhn records. And he said, "Oh, man, you got to check out Pete LaRocca, Basra. Steve Kuhn is insane on there." You know, he loved it. And so I bought it at Tower Records at his recommendation. And so I've had this ever since. And I got to know Pete, and I played in a lot of settings that he had played in prior to that. And so I always love Pete LaRocca. Anything he's on is always going to be swinging and loose. And he's not a super technical drummer, but he had a feeling that was very, 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 very unique to me. A drummer that, well, he's one of my favorite big band drummers. And I actually got to see him play with Sarah Vaughan, so he was a great small group drummer too. Just a great drummer. And this guy's name is Harold Jones, and this is a record called Basic Basie. And I just love, I mean, I'm not a big band drummer. I can't play big band. But I love to listen to it.
So that's not Rufus Jones.
No, that's Rufus Speedy Jones. He was a great drummer too. But this cat, Harold Jones, woo, man, this guy, his right hand, the way he set stuff up, his sound is just, I mean, with Basie, he's, you know, I mean, there's Sonny Payne, there's Gus Johnson, there's Papa Joe. Ed Shaughnessy sounded great with Basie on those two records that he did. Butch Miles was great, who I saw with Basie. But for some reason, this is my favorite drummer with Basie, is Harold Jones. In the 70s, there was a new wave of drummers that were kind of post Elvin Jones, Tony Williams, like high energy, you know, still with the basic gene set of Art Blakey and Max and Philly Joe, but younger guys that were in their 20s, and they had to adjust to the music's direction that was going. So you had people like McCoy Tyner and Charles Tolliver and these guys that were still part of that past 60s, but now they're leaders in the 70s, and the music is getting more and more intense, more high voltage energy. So they needed drummers that could match that intensity. And, you know, you got Jack DeJohnette, you got Lenny White, you got, you know, a bunch of guys, Alphonse Mouzon. But there's some other guys, too, that don't get talked about as much. And one of them is a guy named Howard King, who played with Gary Bartz. And he was a young guy, and I related to these guys because they were a little bit older than me. And they looked like me. They had afros, and they were young, and, you know, dashikis or whatever, bell bottoms. This was 72, 73, 74. And this is when I was buying a lot of records. And I didn't know who a lot of these people were. I might have known who the leader was based on him being on, you know, in this case, Gary Bartz being on a Max Roach record, Members Don't Get Weary. That's how I knew about him. And so I bought this, and the drummer on here is this young kid named Howard King, and he's just, I mean, it's high energy, you know, you know, that whole thing. And that was a way of playing because they needed a drummer to play that, because that's how the music was going. Very much fueled by the way John Coltrane's playing was in the 60s, Miles Davis's quintet, Charles Lloyd's quartet, that whole energy thing. So Gary Bartz and Two True, I've known Rivers and Other Bodies. This is from a live concert in Switzerland. And there was 3 records that came out with this same series. McCoy Tyner, Enlightenment, with Alphonse Mouzon on drums. And then another group of older musicians with Gene Ammons and Dexter Gordon and Cannonball and Nat, Hampton Halls, Kluke, and Bob Cranshaw. I think Kenneth Nash might be playing percussion or somebody like that. So they're all from this Montreux, the same, I don't know, 2 nights or whatever it was, were recorded for Milestone. I think this is Milestone. Yeah, and that's, anyway, Howard King.
What do you know about this guy, SONSHIP THEUS?
Okay, good. Let's segue to that. So, and SONSHIP was a guy who was also part of that period when I found out about him through my friend Howard Curtis, a great drummer who lives in Graz, Austria. But anyway, yeah, so SONSHIP, Woody THEUS. This is his first record, I think, and he's the leader of this. This is a group called the Jazz Symphonics. The label is called Love and Hate. And this is like a group of teenagers in Los Angeles that, he's you know, totally, again, post Elvin Jones, Tony Williams, Joe Chambers, Jack DeJohnette, Pete LaRocca, maybe some of the guys that were playing more of the avant-garde, Cyril, Sonny Murray, Milford, you know. So, but yeah, incredible drumming, and he was a unique guy, and he also played with McCoy, he played with Woody Shaw, he played with John McLaughlin. He was in John McLaughlin's One Truth Band, which was, you know, kind of an offshoot of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, where he's playing fusion with, you know, high, you know, cymbals up real high, all China type or Swiss cymbals. Sometimes he would play standing up. You know, Christmas tree lights on his drums, the whole bit. I mean, the whole 70s, you know, just like I'm you know, down with the establishment, I'm going to do my own thing, that type of thing. But real high energy drumming, a certain way of playing that matched, that the music needed that kind of drumming, you know. It didn't need, you know, it wasn't required for you to play like, I don't know, I'm not saying anything, but like, I don't know, Buddy Rich. I mean, it just wasn't going to work.
It wasn't ding, ding, da, ding, ding.
It wasn't, yeah, it was high energy, and a lot of, you know, I don't know how to describe it, bashing. I guess you could say bashing, but he had a lot of, you know, he had a lot of stuff going on. He was a serious guy. And this is another record of his that I really love, by Horus Tapscott, called Live at Lobero, Volumes 1 and Volume 2. And this is a record that, I don't think this is on the Nimbus label. I don't think it ever came out. Horus Tapscott was kind of like you know, like a leading figure in the African-American jazz community in Los Angeles. Kind of like, I don't want to say Sun Ra or, you know, but he was like, a lot of people flocked to what he was doing, and he led bands and big bands and community, you know, stuff in the African American community. And so these are Volumes 1 and Volume 2, Live at Lobero. And this is with SONSHIP and Roberto Miranda on bass. And SONSHIP is in rare form. Just hearing them in a trio with that same kind of energy. Straight swinging, but bashing, but rhythmic, almost like a percussionist would play the drums. Another guy of the same time period was a guy named Eric GRAVATT, who was with Weather Report and McCoy, you know, back and forth. I think he and Mouzon switched. Mouzon was with Weather Report, and Eric was with McCoy, and then they switched. And then Eric took Mouzon's place with Weather Report, and Mouzon got with McCoy. So Eric GRAVATT, like I explained, was another one of those guys. And so he's on, these are a couple of records that are probably kind of hard to find, because they were by Andrew White, who's a Washington, D.C. based saxophonist, composer. He was one of the first guys to transcribe all of the Coltrane stuff, you know, by hand. I think some Eric Dolphy stuff as well. And he's also a bass player. He played bass with the Fifth Dimension. Anyway, I think GRAVATT lived in Washington, D.C. for a time in the early 70s, maybe even late 60s. And this is him at his unbridled best, man. Again, high energy, long versions with Andrew White. Andrew White Quartet live at the New Thing on Andrew's Music. GRAVATT's on some McCoy Tyner records, of course, some great Weather Report records and some other things. But these two are really unbelievable examples of him playing full out. There's a couple of guys that played with Charles Tolliver who are from that same period. And the first guy is a guy named Jimmy Hops.
I just got that record last week.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this record, The Ringer, is a band that Charles Tolliver had called Music Incorporated. And that's what he was just calling his groups. There was a big band called Music Incorporated and small group. He's another one, post Alvin, Tony Williams, and all those people that I talked about, who younger, that came up and played and was playing great. And this might be the first of the Music Inc. records. This is on Arista Freedom, which is a label that put out some very interesting records. And this was another one that was, let's see, where did I put it? Here he is with Music Inc., more of the big band. No, this isn't the big band. This is just, this is the big band with playing some of that same music. And Jimmy Hops is playing drums on that too. Super bad drummer. His name is Alvin Queen. Are you hip to Alvin Queen?
I know the name.
So anyway, so he took Hops's place. So this is another version of that same band. But Alvin Queen is on drums, who's still very much with us and still playing incredibly well. This is with Hops, live at Slugs, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2 on here, with Cecil McBee, Stanley, and Hops. More Strata East. This is with Alvin Queen. So anyway, those two guys are two drummers that I loved when I was coming up in the 70s. So he's like, these guys are like, that's why I picked out some of these drummers that nobody talks about, and he's still alive and still playing incredibly well, still putting out records. He's bad. He's a bad dude, man. Super bad. I mean, don't mess with it. Don't mess with Alvin Queen. When I talked to Lenny, who's alive, and I talked to him quite a bit, he says that of all of them, this was the cat.
Who is it?
His name is Bobby Ward, and this is one of the records that he's on, maybe 5 or 6 records with Bob Mover, who's a great alto player, Rufus Reed, and Bobby Ward on drums. And there's 2 clips of him on YouTube, but one where he's taking a solo, and you can see all this stuff that you hear Tony, you hear Clifford Jarvis, drum stuff. But some people were saying that he was too much. It was too much drums, some people were saying. But I don't know, not to me as a drummer. But this is one of the few examples of him playing. This is on Xanadu, I believe. Another drummer. Let's just go to the other drummer that we mentioned of that Boston trilogy, or whatever you want to call it, Students of Allen, is a guy named Clifford Jarvis. But this guy was another one that people say, out of the bunch of guys, he might even be the guy to. So this is Clifford Jarvis with Brother Yusef Lateef, with a band of people that I don't know who they are, but Clifford Jarvis is the main drummer on here, and he's playing so great. Kind of like a cross between Haynes, Elvin, and Allen, if you can imagine that. Yeah, he's got an incredible foot technique.
Yeah.
He's unbelievable hands, and an interesting concept. I mean, some people say that he didn't really understand form, but he could just play the drums, and some recordings point to that. But I mean, still, there's some things that he does that I know Tony Williams admired him. He mentions him in a couple of clinics. Another drummer not talked about a lot, but not from Boston, from New Orleans, named James Black. And this is a record called Club Day. I think this is called from an official record called Live at Pep's. But this is James Black with Brother Youssef, Richard Williams, notes on trumpet, Mike Knock, New Zealand pianist, Ernie Farrow, who is on bass, who is Alice Coltrane's brother, and James Black. And he's another one that's just, whew, man, you hear this and you just go, wow. You know, I don't think he stayed in New York long, but he's a drummer that people don't talk about much. He's very, 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 very well known in New Orleans, and but I think one of the more recent things that he did before he passed away was he's on a Wynton Marsalis, Marsalis and Chico Freeman record called Fathers and Sons.
Wow.
And it's like Vaughn Freeman with Ellis Marsalis, and then their sons, and the drummer is James Black. This is a record that I loved growing up. Yeah, that might be one of my
love those
dad's.
records.
Yeah,
Had multiple copies.
yeah, my dad. This is a record called Arc with Chick Corea and Barry Ottrell and Dave Holland, and I love this record. I love the sound of it. I love the way Barry's playing on here. The more famous version of this group is this record with the addition of Anthony Braxton on saxophone. But I like this one the best. And then they did a record for Blue Note too, Circling In and Circle. But this is great. Barry Ottrell, his sound. It's kind of free bop or whatever you want to call it. They do a version of Nefertiti on here that's kind of raucous and loose, but I like the sound of it. And Barry's still here. He's still right in New York, you know. This record is one of the early records I got when I was growing up, and it's a compilation of material from Art Blakey, Max Roach, Elvin Jones, and Philly Joe Jones. And you can't really go wrong with this. I mean, and so I listened to this to death. Tony Williams' Lifetime, Believe It. I got this from my sister for my 15th birthday or something. Huh. And, you know, Tony had kind of been inactive for a couple of years. I think he emerged on a record just before this, a Stanley Clarke solo record, with one with Lopsy Lou and all that stuff, with, I think, Jan Hammer and Bill Connors. And Tony sounded great. And then he came out with this record, and this kind of introduced the world internationally maybe to Alan Holdsworth on guitar. But this record is I've had this since that time, and oddly enough, when I pulled it out, because it's been remastered on CD, but when I pulled it out, I looked and I met Cindy Blackman when I was about 14, and so she was into Tony Williams back then, even then, and we were kids. I lived in Virginia, and she was there with some neighbors. Anyhow, she came over to my house and she saw this record sitting on the floor or something, and she was like, "You like, you know?" And I was like, "Yeah," and, you know. So anyway, so I've known her for a long time, and you know, so I got her to just write her name on it, and then one of my best friends at that time, Roy Wooten, they call him Future Man, wow. But these were my neighbors, and so we saw Tony Williams together for the first time. Roy and I went to Boston to see Tony Williams. And then he's kind of like my roommate in college, a guy named Carter Buford. He plays with the Dave Matthews Band. So Carter signed this when I was in college because we went to college together. This is a record that, and I talked to Lenny about this. I love this record. And Lenny did the artwork for this and everything.
He did?
Lenny White presents The Adventures
That's his artwork?
Yeah, and he wrote like a space opera.
But he created all those images?
I think so. I think he did
Wow.
It's his concept, this whole thing. And it's a fusion record.
Yeah, totally.
But it's great. It's great. And then there's one track on here, and I always ask him about this. There's one track on here where they play straight ahead jazz, but only for about 30 seconds. It kind of fades in, and they're swinging, and it's incredible, and then it fades out. And I said, "Lenny, man, why did you, you know?" He's just like, "I just wanted to, you know." It's like, it's great though. The music is great. It's really great.
Like he's on a mainstream record I've been looking for forever. I forgot who the leader is.
Is it this?
That's it. Damn.
He and Jabali are on this. And they were
Right.
over here at my house recently, and I pulled this out, and they were both looking at it just kind of like they hadn't heard it since they did it. I don't even know if they've ever heard it.
We have a different Buddy Terry on mainstream, but not that one. I've been looking for that one.
This is great. This is...
He's playing the oil can bass drum.
Yeah. And there's another record on mainstream called Crankin' by Curtis Fuller that Lenny's on. And Stanley is on it. And that's early, too.
Huh.
What else? He's on Blackstone Legacy, of course.
Right, yeah, wow.
I'm just trying to think. He's on some early Eddie Henderson records. He's on, Passing Ships, which didn't come out until later, Andrew Hill.
Right.
But yeah, this is great because Lenny and Jabali are on here.
Wow.
And this is Buddy Terry, who was like a Newark, New Jersey kind of tenor player.
Killer.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And it's a couple of tracks they're playing at the same time. Billy. There's Lenny with his hat, his hat that he used to wear, and there's Jabali.
Huh.
Yeah. It was so funny when I pulled this out and they were over here and they were looking at it just like, just.
Wow.
This is a record that's very difficult to find, I think. And this is called The Cosmic Chicken. Do you ever see this around?
I have both those records. Very hard to find.
Yeah, this one, I wish this would come out on CD.
What's strange is, they reissued, I think, by the...
Sorcery.
It's just like...
It's not as good as this.
Hell no, it's bizarre. Why'd you... What?
Yeah, it should have been this one.
Strange.
If you're going to do the Prestige stuff, or Milestone stuff, or whatever it was, do this one. This is great. I mean, and on this record, he does a thing called Last Chance Stomp. And he says, an abridged history of jazz in 5 movements, where they do something with the sonics at the beginning, so it sounds like a scratchy 78, and he's playing in the style of, let's say, Baby Dodds or George Wetling or something like that. And he's playing like that. And then they move into another area and it's more like a swing thing. And then the sound gets better. And then they get into the bebop thing and the sound gets better yet. And he's playing more like Max, Philly Joe, Art Blakey. And then they move into the present. And it's kind of space bop. So you hear him taking the drums. That's why it says an unabridged history of jazz. You hear him taking the drums through all these different styles, and he matches it with the fidelity that was available at those particular times. And it's just brilliant the way he does it. And he plays piano on here. He plays a Steve Swallow song called Eiderdown, where he plays his ass off on piano. Anyway, yeah, and this is the Dijonette Complex, which is another one where he plays melodica. And the second drummer, when he's playing melodica, is Roy Haynes. Another Jack DeJohnette record that I love, that actually Mike Clark and he brought this up a few months ago on the phone. We were talking, because nobody has ever brought this up. George Adams' Sound Suggestions. Are you hip to this? With Kenny Wheeler. It's basically kind of a Kenny Wheeler sounding record because Kenny's songs are on here and Kenny's vibe is just so Kenny Wheeler. But hearing George Adams in that context to me is remarkable. And I have 3 copies. One, this is sealed. I love this record so much. This is before it came out on CD, and I thought it would never emerge on CD. But it has. But I'm glad I have these copies. But Jack's sound on here is a little bit more open. You can hear more of the room sound. And this is in, when it's sonars and sound creation, Peisty Dark Rides, and that whole thing, and all of its glory. And Jack is just, man, he's playing so great on here. Another one that was really influential to me at that time was a record called Moon Germs on CTI. And this is kind of unlike most of the CTI records in terms of the music and the way it's played. And Jack is just, I love this record. And this one too with Jack. Both of these are so un-CTI-like, but they're on CTI. This was supposed to be, and they even, I think they recorded, there must be some tracks, some evidence of it somewhere. It was, the personnel is Herbie Hancock, Stanley Clarke, Jack DeJohnette, and Joe Farrell. It was supposed to be Keith Jarrett and Tony Williams.
Really?
And something happened in the studio. I don't know what happened. Something went wrong. I don't know if it was a conflict of interest, if it was attitudes, or if it was mechanical, but it didn't come out.
Keith and Tony, they never played together.
Keith and Tony, there's no recorded that I've seen of Keith and Tony playing.
That's interesting.
I mean, and I'm sure, Keith would, Tony is Tony Williams, man. Without that quintet with Miles and them, they're responsible for, in a lot of ways, for the people that came after them. So the Essential Joe Jones and Joe Jones Trio. This is on Vanguard. This is on Everest. For brushes, it doesn't really get any better than this. It's, for brushes, Elvin's great brushes, Kenny Clark, Vernell Fournier, Ed Thigpen, Shelly Manne. Those are kind of like my top guys. Philly Joe, Max. But this is pretty much the Bible of how to play the brushes. This is the sound. The sound is just insane. Have you listened to these on your hi-fi?
Yeah, that Everest is very well recorded.
It's just nuts, and this one too.
Yeah, I don't know that one as well.
They're both just incredible. This record I actually wrote before I met Billy Hart. I wrote him a letter telling him that this was my favorite record. At the time, this record really struck me. Asha Mary, this record on Gramavision. This is hard to find now, but this is kind of like looking to the future. And he did it before with Enchants, but this is even because he's got Steve Coleman on here. I think he's got Bill Frisell, Kevin Eubanks, Dave Holland, the violin player Mark Feldman, and Kenny Kirkland. And this is a great record, man. Billy Hart, I don't know how to pronounce Asha Mare, and this is really incredible. And Billy's one of those guys that when you look at his background, you see all the influences of, because he played so much music. Pharoah Sanders, Shirley Horn, Wes Montgomery, Jimmy Smith, Pharoah Sanders, M1 Dishi, Stan Getz, a zillion sideman dates with everybody from Albert Daly to whoever, And so when he came out with his first record, Enchants, I was kind of surprised because of the personnel. Another guy that I loved, and I still do, he's not around anymore, unfortunately, is a guy named Jon Christensen. And he was probably, after Jack DeJohnette, maybe the other house drummer for ECM. And he's another post-Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, post-Jack DeJohnette drummer. When you hear him on those early recordings with Steve Kuhn, 69, he sounds kind of like Tony and Jack, right? But these are two records that people don't talk about. Miroslav Vitus had a group, and he did 2 records for ECM, the Miroslav Vitus group. And this record has John Sermon on different woodwind instruments, Kenny Kirkland on piano. This is before Wynton Marsalis. And these are great records. Both records have the same group. And this is the first one, this is the second one. But they're great and beautifully recorded. And to hear Kenny Kirkland, a very young Kenny Kirkland in this context, is quite remarkable. And of course, Jon Christensen sounds fantastic. And this record was really influential, is Home, the music of Robert Creeley, the poems of Robert Creeley, and the music of Steve Swallow. And this has Bob Moses on drums. And one of the great drum solos of all time is on this record. Well, a huge influence on me up there is Al Foster. And these are 2, we talked earlier about the Great Jazz Trio, which I'm a huge fan of. I just got that record recently. Yeah, there's 2 of them, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2. Great Jazz Trio revisited at the Village Vanguard with Hank Jones, Eddie Gomez, and Al. And this is some great Al Foster. Primo. This one and the first record that I was turned on with Al Foster is a record by Dave Liebman called Pendulum.
What's special about Al Foster?
Everything. His touch, his sound, his concept, his time. His concept is, he's coming at it from another place. You can hear A.T. and his hipness of the cymbal beat. You can hear Max in his melodic concept. You can hear another neglected name in drumming named Edgar Baitman. You can hear some of that. He influenced Moses too. Edgar Baitman influenced Moses, and he influenced Al Foster. He's so swinging. He's so in touch with what's going on. You know, like his telepathy with Joe Henderson is kind of remarkable. I used to see them play together all the time. Another guy that influenced me greatly, and he was around a lot, you know, the first 20 years I was in New York, was Ben Riley. And a lot of people don't talk about him. But this band I used to see all the time, a band called Sphere. And with Kenny Barron, Charlie Rouse, and Buster. And man, this was some serious grown-up swinging. I'm serious. You don't hear this anymore. You just don't hear it. You don't hear it anymore.
Thanks, Billy.
Okay.
Great deep dive.
Okay. Thank you, Ken, for inviting me to your show.